So I hope you are ready to start. Okay, so that's the book for you. It already looks quite exciting, does it not? Okay, this is where we start. No two people agree about where the first people to live in Britain came from. Mr. Patel, down the road, was fairly sure they came from India. Well, he would, wouldn't he? While my chum, Seamus Murphy, seems to remember being told in The Goat and Shamrock that they came from County Wexford. Although it's common knowledge you could once walk to France, there is no record of England ever being joined to Ireland. Most confident of all was my old schoolmate Winston, who knows they came from Africa. After asking real experts, I found out Winston's probably right, but I'd never hear the end of it if I told him. Since we now all appear to be immigrants, there's probably no such thing as a proper Englishman. We're going to stop a little bit here and talk about some words, some phrases that I am very excited about, and I would like you to get excited about them as well. So first of all, this light blue word chum. You might have heard that before. In case you did not, so that is a friend, okay? Another peculiar word is a proper name, Seamus or Seamus. And the reason why I have highlighted it in light blue for you is that very often we rely on our intuition when we study the language. And that is an excellent thing to do. I'm sure your teachers have told you many, many times, you know, whenever you are in doubt about something in the language, trust yourself. Now, guys, if it is a proper name, sometimes it's worth checking its pronunciation. And so did I, okay? So, and I have found out that it is actually not Seamus or anything like that, so it's Seamus or Seamus. Then, what else do we learn here about Britain, even about modern Britain? Mr. Patel, obviously, well, he comes from India, so he doesn't know very little maybe about England and the history of the whole of the UK. So he says that the first people to live in Britain came from the next road to his house, or something like that. Then another friend of the writer, Seamus Murphy, says that he heard something in the pub called Goat and Shamrock. So Goat and Shamrock, I'm pretty sure, is the name of the pub where British people, well, those that are over 18, or to be exact, over 21, may meet up and chat about life, okay? And then there is another mention of Ireland. And by reading this phrase, there is no record of England ever being joined to Ireland, is a little bit of an exclamation mark for you. Maybe we've got to learn more about liaisons, about relationships that have been there for some time between England and Ireland. And then another light blue expression for you here, you would never hear the end of it. Now, this is a fantastic phrase that you can use wherever you go, whenever you think that the story that the person retells or tells you a joke or gives you an account of something exciting will never end. So that's the one that you can actually pick up and use in your speech, okay? And then there is this little picture of these first so-called Britons. What do we hear here? What do we see here? Do we have to go further And guess what? There is a little comment, the first nagging. I think we all know potentially, and this is the context for you where you can use your linguistic intuition, that the word nagging means something a little bit uncomfortable, especially for the person who is taking another one on the trip. There was this cartoon where this big green man, or I think, yeah, so he was traveling with a donkey, and the donkey kept asking him, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? So that question would be nagging, okay? So that is that girl nagging here. So let's move further into native Britons. Anyway, wherever we came from, our ancestors were a pretty scruffy, lazy lot, spending most of their time hanging around, waiting for history to begin. They only ate what stumbled right in front of them, and unlike their posh relatives in the south of France and Spain, didn't even get round to trying to cheer up their caves by painting those deft-looking animals on their walls. Mind you, there are some amongst us, mentioning no names, who believe they did the caves a favor. All right, so that in this particular paragraph, there is such a great mockery on British people themselves. So basically the author, the writer of this book, recognizes that his nation is not the one that is so forward art and artistic doings that they were amongst the first to have their caves painted, for example. He identifies his nation as scruffy and pretty lazy lot. If you have never before seen the word lot in this context, the word lot here would mean people. So he refers to people by using the word lot, okay? Pretty scruffy, lazy lot, okay? Just in case you have a problem with the word scruffy, scruffy would mean dirty, okay? But not dirty in a way that you have lots of oil stains on you, but just not looking neat, okay? Presentable, so to say. And that would be true about British people themselves. I think they are the ones that are not the ones to dress very well, let's say. Okay. Then we are moving into this cave business, okay? When you get round to trying to cheer up or doing something, that would mean start doing something, okay? So they were not the ones who really wanted to have their caves decorated, okay? They didn't want to cheer themselves up by painting on the walls of the cave. But let's see how animals that were painted on those walls, say, for example, in the caves found in France, which is also a doubt, are described as deft-looking animals. So beautifully designed, done in an interesting way, in a surprisingly interesting way. And if you have ever seen ancient people drawings, you would give that this particular characteristic. You would say, oh, they're deft-looking animals, like whoa, basically, okay? Another one who believed they did the caves a favor. Now, that is a pure British joke for you. So, by the fact that Britons didn't take part in cave design, they actually did history a favor. Perhaps because they are not so good at painting or maybe being artistic. Okay, so when we learn this phrase, to do someone a favor, that would be some formal context. Usually when you say, oh, would you do me a favor? And then you say, what do you want to do? When here, that comes as an opposite idea. almost, okay? So do me a favor, stop singing, something like that, okay? However, so we're going to start reading the second paragraph on this slide. However, when really at a loose end, they did do strange things with huge stones, stacking them in circles or lines like those at Stonehenge or Avebury, probably for no better reason than to drive everyone crazy centuries later, trying to work out what they did it, why they did it. Now that is another fantastic word combination into your bank. So to be at a loose end. Very often in summertime, well, that doesn't concern you now, you being kind of all mindfulness and in preparation for the big event in your life, I mean, entering university. But very often when you finish school and when summer starts, you find yourself at a loose end. You don't know what to do. So maybe a bit of a game, maybe a bit of a TV watch, maybe a bit of doing nothing. So whenever you feel like you don't know what to do, that would be to be at a loose end. Okay, so there is another mockery. The writer suggests that perhaps, well, which is obviously, well, not very true, we need evidence for that, but that is a funny book. So we trust the writer, in fact, that this is just one of the evidence that he gives for a reason why Stonehenge, for example, was created. Maybe indeed they were at a loose end and they had nothing to do. Now have a look at this cartoon. Isn't it fantastic? No, we can't wait for wallpaper to be invented. Then there is a turtle as an early footstool. Notice, yeah, so that is not, it's not a chair or an armchair or anything like that. That is stool, but it has no handles. And then there is cave paint. And that is the same lady that right on the slide that came first was doing what? Right, she was negging. And so she continues doing so, you see? All right. Okay, so we start with the first paragraph here. Long after, you couldn't even paddle to France, but long before, the channel was chock full of strange, greasy people swimming backwards and forwards for no apparent reason, the first tourists started turning up. And I need to stop here right from the very beginning, because when I was reading this sentence for myself, I was thinking greasy people swimming backwards and forwards. What was the reference of that? So I was looking into this cultural moments and events in the history of Britain, and then I remembered, and maybe you do too, that there is a competition, a swimming competition in the UK, when they actually swim the channel backwards and forwards, putting lots of grease on them, like lots of fat, so that they don't get frozen and numb in water. Okay, so this is a reference to the present day moment. People still do that. Okay, these swarthy continentals didn't have to go through customs. No ships, no ports, therefore no customs. They didn't even have to state how long they intended staying. All they had to do was slay anyone who challenged them and set up home wherever they pleased. Okay. Well, again, what do we see here? Well, people moved backwards and forwards. Were there any passports available? No. Okay. Were they going through difficult times of pandemic? I think many times. And I think for many years they had something similar to ours, but they had no chance to stay home. I think hardly any had any home in those days. And we have a proof for that. You see this light blue word for you highlighted. But long before, the channel was chock full of strange, greasy people. When something is chock full, it means it's packed with people. So whenever you go to a big concert, or I would even say to the beach in summer, and you would say, oh, it's chock full, let's leave, let's find a better place for sunbathing, all right? So that would be chock full for you. That's a good one. That's a good one to put in your vocabulary bank. Swarthy continentals. Now, that is a word combination in style for you. What do we say when we see people that are of darker skin, for example? Now, we would say, oh, you have a nice tan. Or maybe we would say, oh, are you Caribbean? But maybe if the skin of a person is a little bit darker than yours, like, for example, mine now. Well, I've been in the sun a lot for no reason, really. So believe me, I was doing hard work marking students' papers, but I get tanned quite quickly. So I would be, a swarthy continental as well. So people coming from a continent, and that is an adjective for you, meaning slightly brown. Okay, talking about the skin of a person. So you see, so you can describe history in a funny way. So you can make references to events that take place now, these greasy people swimming the channel. You may still talk about the old days and the old ways of people traveling. So whenever they didn't like anyone, they just had to slay a person, and the road is clear, and the green light is on, and so you can drive on and conquer any land, any space you want. Okay, right, so let's come to the second paragraph. This began in 4,000 years BC, give or take a century. In those days, they always said BC after the date. B stood for before, and C stood for Christ. God knows how they knew he was coming. Okay? In terms of meaning of this, that's pretty easy. Okay? So there's no, we can even say there is no nothing. Okay? So we have a double negative here. Okay, BC. B stands for before, C stands for Christ. But what do we have? We have a final line which says, God knows how they knew he was coming. The writer is not religious, is he? He uses God. He appeals to this, but he uses it in a different context from the religious one, right? So he goes, well, I don't know how they knew he was coming. So it is more of a funny joke, well, in the frame of this particular storyline that the writer has offered for us. Okay, so there you go, another piece of British humor for you. Okay, very reluctant about things, very, how would I say that? Maybe you can later help me in the chat. Okay, so how would I say that? What would be a good synonym for the word reluctant when we talk about the British and their attitude towards religion, politics, and all that? Okay, simply the fact that they turned up in boats of some kind proves that the new visitors had more marbles than the poor old native Britons, which wasn't difficult. They proceeded to invent clothes, wheels, refrigerators, only joking, and very sharp iron spears, which made stabbing our poor forefathers and foremothers much quicker and easier. Okay, I hope you notice similar things that I do. We have forefathers and foremothers, and he puts that in brackets, okay? So although the author is being politically correct, I think he understands the excess in that, okay? So he puts for mothers in brackets for us, just to have, you know, a little bit of a smile on our faces. Now, you see the word marbles highlighted for you. When we learn the word marble, we would learn it in singular, and we would think about big things like Rome, sculptures, something artistic, something dramatic. But In this particular context, marbles in plural has nothing to do with marble in singular. Marbles, that is actually something you have here, okay? A little bit of smartness, a little bit of cleverness, and that's how you have marbles. So basically brains, okay? So again, the writer, what he's saying to us here, he's saying that the visitors were brainier. So yeah, they were a little bit brainy, and they were brainier than the poor old native Britons. So it was easy for them to settle down and to start living side by side with old native Britons. Okay. So meanwhile, and these dates always seem to cause fights among historians, which is true. I don't know whether you read a lot of history and whether you listen to any YouTube videos or podcasts, but you know that there is a big fight almost about everything. So don't believe a word that is written in here, neither any other words that you read in other sources. You have to form your own opinions and become critical readers, but only after you've gone through some reading. So that's what we're doing now. Let's see how this writer goes through the dates. I'm going to read some of the dates to you, but maybe not all of them. I get tired from reading the dates. 1,400,000 BC, an unknown apeman lit the first fire. An unknown apeman. Right, okay. So of course no one knows who that apeman had been. 500,000 BC, first upright man made a son of tool out of a bit of flint. And if you have ever read any fairy tales, you would know that a flint may cause lots of magic. So I'm going to leave this word out for you there, along with reluctant. So maybe you can give me a definition of the word, or maybe tell me what is the fairy tale where the flint plays a very important role, okay? 25,000 BC, someone dropped a bit of meat in the fire and discovered it tastes better. Remember how he talked about old native Britons, that they were lazy, scruffy lot? Maybe they actually did that. Maybe they literally dropped a bit of meat into the fire and thought, wow, tastes good to me. 20,000 BC, wheel invented, but proved pretty useless until someone invented another one. That's a whole drama, guys. Just imagine, you invent a wheel, you're trying to prove its miraculous use, but without having a second wheel, that becomes pretty impossible, okay? So that is a disappointment, is it not? 10,000 BC, weapons used for killing animals and each other. Very true, very true. 8,600 BC, someone planted a seed and discovered he could eat what it grew into. Okay, so to grow into something. So although here the expression is used about a seed, we can actually talk about people growing into some other people. So you're almost on the threshold of new life. So that is pretty, well, interesting to know what you will grow into once you complete your education at a university. Well, let's say bachelor degree first, and then you'll see whether you are up to it or not. 8,400 BC, first domesticated dog in North America. Sorry, I don't know his name. 5,000 BC, sea filled up between Britain and Europe. Hooray! You know why there is this hooray written in brackets? British, they're proud people. They love being British. They love being the island. So that is this hooray, identifying partly their cultural identity. 2,500 BC, skis invented in Norway. No package holidays till much later, however. Well, no good news on this side. I think this year we're going to wait for package holidays. for some time, yeah. So we've got to have our patience, so as old native Britons did. 1500 BC, Bronze Age hit Britain, yeah. 1400 BC, Pharaoh Amenophis got his first engineer to build a water dock. Shadow clocks had been okay, but weren't much use if you wanted to check if it was bedtime. Yeah, British love jokes, don't they? They really do, believe me, they really do. So what you have here, you have shadow clocks, and obviously they didn't work at night, did they? So they had to invent something different. I don't know whether you recognized this Egyptian pharaoh, Amenophis. That is another thing that you can check out, and then tell me in the chat whether you recognize this pharaoh or not. I would only tell you that he grew into a very weak man, and he always had a lot of issues with bones, and eventually got killed as he was riding, simply by being hit and fallen out of his carriage. 600 BC, Welshmen invented the first proper boat, a coracle. It was made from skin stretched over a wooden frame. Amazingly, they've only just stopped using them. And that is a little bit of a nasty joke about Welsh. English people think that Welsh are a little bit strange. First of all, they have their own language. Welsh people think that they are very different from English, which may be absolutely true, and you're going to discover this for your own self if you haven't yet started this discovery. And so he talks about them, you see, in a tone that allows him to make this joke that they are still using these coracles, very primitive boats, for fishing and hunting. Now, chapter 2, the cunning Celts. I don't know about your context, I mean the one that where you learned the word cunning, if you have ever learned that. I remember how I was at school, and maybe I was 8 years of age or maybe 10, and I remember we had this fairy tale to read, and fairy tales are very difficult to read. They have a lot of words that you would never make use of, especially if you are a 10-year-old in any dialogue or like face-to-face work, etc. So the fairy tale was called The Cunning Fox. And I and a friend of mine, we thought that perhaps that is a breed, so a type of a fox. And as fairy tale progressed, we realized that obviously that wasn't a breed, it wasn't a type. It was about the intellect of a fox, of this animal being very clever and foreseeing things, so that whenever something happens, fox always has plan B. So I hope that you are as cunning as foxes there, guys. So once the new visitors began to settle in, life went quite smoothly until England was invaded properly for the first time by the Celts. They came here in 650 BC from Central Europe, apparently looking for tin, another metal that I think you can discover on your own. Please don't ask me why, the writer says. The Celts were tall, blonde, and blue-eyed, and so got all the best girls right away. This, of course, annoyed the poor Britons even more, but there was not much they could do about it, as they only had sticks and fists to fight with. The Celts set up home in the south of England, around Surrey and Kent, the stockbroker belt, building flesh wooden forts, which with the poor bone-headed locals could only mill around in awe and envy. That is a fantastic paragraph, guys, with lots of humor. Okay, so first of all, these Celts, blonde, blue-eyed, got the best girls. I think it was like that, because there are quite a few blue-eyed and blonde Brits around there. Well, the situation has changed, and we know the outcomes of that, but this is not the talk about the outcomes. That is a good old story, and let's believe it, that Celts were tall, blonde, blue-eyed, who stole all the girls that Britons had. Okay, so another funny bit is about sticks and fists to fight with. Okay, so Britons were not as cunning as Celts, were they? And then another cultural note for you. So now you know, when you become rich and popular, and if you would like to be a little bit to be on a little bit of a hype, so you can get a house around Surrey and Kent. You know where to buy a house so that you live in a posh environment with the right people, and then you can boast off. But then be careful. Buying a house in England could be of a lot of trouble. First of all, rainy weather, neighbors that you need to learn to talk to, and then, of course, being far away from the sunny beaches of other countries. But there you go. You can decide here for your own selves. So what were old native Britons left with? They had to mill around in awe and envy around these flesh wooden forts. When you have a flesh car or a flesh house in Surrey and Kent, that means it's magnificent. It's brand new. It's the cutting edge of technology. And these old native Britons were simply walking around those forts and thinking, how on earth did they actually build that? We want something like that too. But what have we got? Sticks and fists. Okay, so you can also mill around. Well, for example, you're having a date. You came a little bit early and you are milling around in the park, for example, waiting for your friend. When you do that in awe, you almost have your mouth open. So you go like, and freeze for a second or two, okay? Now, England wasn't too bad a place to live for the next few hundred years, provided you were tall, blue-eyed, and blonde. So you see, it wasn't a good enough place to live in for all native Britons, but it was a good place to live for Celts. Then, in 55 BC, the late great Julius Caesar, star of stage and screen, arrived with a couple of legions from Rome, Italy. The refined Romans were repelled in more ways than one by the crude Celts, who by this time had turned blue from woad. They did, however, come back a year later with a much bigger, better equipped army, and guess what? Were repelled again. Okay, so, well, Romans thought it was going to be an easy win. It wasn't an easy win for the Romans, so they had to come again, and then again, and then they had to come again. Okay, so what do we have in here? Repelled. When you say stop, maybe you need to go back to the place where you came from. Okay, so they weren't allowed to stay. No massacre happened, but the Celts were strong and they refused the Romans and didn't let them in. They were knocking on the door and knocking on the door, but the Celts didn't let them in. This is another discovery that you can make on your own. Why did Celts almost turn blue from woad? What is that? And why did they turn blue? Did they turn blue because they were cold and frozen? Or maybe woad is something different from cold and weather, and maybe that's why they turned blue. 55 BC, the Romans. You couldn't get away from the fact, however, that the Romans were much sharper than the Celts, hence the term a Roman nose. They therefore decided that they would infiltrate peacefully rather than invade, which was just a sneaky Italian trick. How the Celts didn't notice the deftly dressed Roman soldiers, I'll never know. Okay, so another synonym for you for the word coming, sharper, right? So you can have a sharpener to sharpen your pencil. Your pencil can be sharp enough to write an exam and get a 5, right? But you can also be sharper, meaning cleverer, okay? And then there is this funny joke about a Roman nose. And here we see a rather prominent Roman nose, but that of course is a different nose from the word to know. So Romans decided to infiltrate, and there the writer prepares for you another joke. So to infiltrate would mean to start living peacefully with the tribes that they were already there, almost without being noticed. And there comes the joke. How the Celts didn't notice the deftly dressed Roman soldiers, I'll never know. You know how Roman soldiers were dressed, don't you? So this funny kind of white dresses, at least they are pictured for us like that. And all those Celts dressed, well, almost like cavemen, you know, in fur and very, very, very primitive wear. So how they didn't notice that the Romans started to actually infiltrate, okay? And then, of course, you know by now that British people love themselves so much. So here is another, a quick and slight comment about Italians. It was just a sneaky Italian trick. If you do something sneaky, it means you try to do something, maybe not very honest, without being noticed. Okay, so it's just a little comment, but you know, there is always a room for a comment. The first ruler of southern England was a chap called Rex. Under his rule, these smart Italians made money by turning the poor natives into slaves and swapping them for Eastern luxuries, probably cheap scent and Turkish delight. Well, of course, they didn't swap them, so exchanged them for Turkish delight. We know what Turkish delights are. So these sweet little things that sometimes we buy in airports, or I think now we can, whenever we go shopping to the shopping centers, you can have this little sweets that come from Turkey, made of syrup and sugar and cheap scents. It's quite fancy now to have you know, a scented candle at home or something that creates a nice smell. So I don't think that they did that, but there is a fact given to us. Well, at least maybe it's anecdotal evidence, but the writer is presenting it to us as a fact. So AD 43, Anno Domini, so another era started, Boadicea. Okay, a very unusual name, again, worth checking. This gradual infiltration took longer than expected, and the Romans became rather impatient. Emperor Claudius, of high fame, sent another lot of legions to conquer us properly, which they did properly. The only real trouble they encountered was a strange woman warrior from somewhere near Norwich. Right, so here I'm going very quickly to tell you a story about Emperor Claudius. What do we know about Emperor Claudius? He was the emperor, and his name was Claudius. Why is this I in brackets for you? That is a cultural note for you, that in 1976, I think, well, in late 70s, there was a show on TV created having as the basis the book called I, Claudius. So the script was written based on the book I, Claudius, and there was that show, and the show became very, very popular. So whenever you reference to Claudius in Britain, they would say Claudius, I Claudius, because that is the title of the book, I Claudius. And that would be a very good cultural reference that you can make. And there you go. You have just found it in the book that is almost on history of England, but also on many, many other things. And there is another cartoon here for you, Stop the Roman, okay? So this is how they infiltrated, okay? So of course people noticed, but maybe they were peaceful. Maybe they were actually swapping some natural oils and something else there for cheap cents and Turkish delights. Don't trust me here, no. So Boadicea, more about Boadicea. Her name was Boadicea, and from the only available picture I'd seen, she seemed to travel everywhere in a very snazzy horse-drawn cart with blades sticking out of the wheels. This must have made parking in London rather tricky, which is probably why she burnt it to the ground. She went on to kill 70,000 Romans, but when they started getting the better of things, poisoned herself. Some people are such bad losers. A lot of cultural things here, guys. So the first thing, snazzy horse-drawn cart. Imagine no one expects it from you, but suddenly you win 5,000 millions, okay? And you buy yourself a snazzy car. And that is so, people kneel around your car in awe and go, really? Oh, what a snazzy car. In those times, that was a snazzy horse-drawn cart with blades sticking out of the wheels. Pretty dangerous. Another cultural note for you, London is very difficult for parking. I do not recommend taking out driving in the city of London in the car and renting it out. No. It costs quite a lot. So then I would recommend taking either a cab or maybe walking. This girl didn't want that. She had this snazzy horse-drawn cart, so she burnt the whole of London, but she didn't burn London that you know now and I know now. She burnt London many years ago, so we don't really care about that. But the amount of Romans she killed is notorious, 70,000. And then it all ends up with another joke made by a British person. Some people are such bad losers. She just couldn't take it. You see, Romans started to get better of things, meaning that they started taking over, and she didn't want to take that, so she poisoned herself. So guys, that was a little bit of the bloody history of Britain to you, and maybe we can take some questions.
Yes, Polina, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions here from the chat. So you have already answered the first question from Julia about the title of the book.
Yeah, okay. So I'm...
Okay, and the second question is from Nikita. What literature will you recommend to someone who is finishing school now?
Okay, so it's very hard to recommend anything particular now when so many people have so many different tastes. And if you are undecided and you have some time on your hands, I think you can Google for the top 10 in history or for the top 10 in art, or maybe you can trust the experts as well and see whether historians or designers or any experts that come from the fields that you are interested in can recommend. You can also trust those sometimes, you know, journals and magazines publish some top books that you might actually try that. But I can also share with you one good old way. Go to a bookshop, mill around the bookshop, and you will definitely get what you want, because it's your taste. So maybe when you want really to discover something for yourselves, then do it on your own, and then you can always Google. But for an hour or two, I think you don't have to Google. You can simply mill around the bookshop. And this is the book title, John Farman, The Very Bloody History of Britain Without the Boring Bits. I hope that you all understand, guys. So this is just a version and a very optional version of the history of the UK. I would say that it is presented informally in a very friendly manner to people who maybe want to get interested. But what is more, people who would like to get interested in more than history. So remember how many cultural bits I have mentioned to you today, how many phrasal verbs and set expressions have come round, and you can definitely employ them in your own speech and use them in your talks, etc. Any more questions there?
Thank you. I think we are done. We don't have any more questions.
Okay, so thank you guys for being here with me. If you would like that, we can always repeat. There are many, many chapters left, so let me know and I'll be very happy to read more to you. Okay, you take care. Have a nice day. Goodbye.